All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So Marco, we're going to start with hip swivels. All right. So all I want is for you to sit upright. And from here, we're going to do 30 reps total, which just means it's going to be 15 each side. All right. So I'm going to rotate. That's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Readjust if you need to. "28, 29, and 30. All right. You guys might be familiar with some of these hip warm-ups from the hip ability program. So now I'm gonna lay on my back. Okay, so I'm here, feet are together. Now I'm basically gonna do the same thing. Okay, resting my head on the ground. 1, 2, 3, total of 30. $15. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 29, and 30. All right, so pretty simple to start the warm up. All right, and so now we're going to go into our first hip stretch. Okay, so we're going to work on again. We're going to start with from the 90-90 position. Okay, we're going to work on some hip external rotation here. Okay, so what we want to focus on is this knee being at 90 degrees, and this is just our starting position. Okay, if this is a tough starting position for you, you can also set a block. So if you have a block, which I have here, you can set that underneath your hip like this. So it'll be underneath the working hip. Okay, and then from here, what I want to think about doing is keeping my, staying relatively tall through my spine. And then what I want to think about doing is almost actively flexing or pulling my femur into the back of my hip socket. Okay, so just find you some good positioning there so you feel a nice stretch to the outside of the hip. Okay, then if we want to make the position a little bit more difficult, obviously we can take away the block, but then we can also straighten out the back leg. Okay, so I'm going to work from this position here. All right, we're going to go for about 90 seconds. Or sorry, we'll go 2 minutes on this one. What I really want people to focus on is not even so much the time. I want you to focus more on your breathing. Okay, so it's very important when we're doing the flexibility work that we're taking big inhales and big exhales. Okay, and you'll find that you don't even need to really force the stretch or any position. So it'll automatically just go in deeper in the range of motion as you breathe. Okay. Especially as you start to get towards your end range, you're going to want to use that breathing. Okay, that's going to help you a lot. Try to keep, if you can, the center of your torso over the midline of your thigh. Okay. About 45 seconds left. Then as we progress through the stretch, you can also remove the block. So you can start on a block in the beginning of the stretch, and then you can move off the block during the stretch, right? So that's one way we can measure progress, even just in the set. You got about 20 seconds left. Making sure we're breathing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to slowly exit that stretch. Okay, don't jerk out of the stretch. And then we're going to switch sides. So for this one, I'll have a little bit more angle kind of towards the camera so you can see how my body is lined up. Right, go ahead. You can just follow along the video with the timer. You don't have to have set a timer by yourself. Okay, so you can just follow along with this. I'll give you a minute to set up. And again, we can start this position just kind of from our 90-90 positioning. Okay, that's going to get us at least in position. And then we can kind of feel it out and see where we're at. And so I'm going to go ahead and put my back leg behind me here. Again, slight active flexion of the hip. So think about pulling the hip socket or the femur back into your hip socket. All right. And then we're going to go same here. 2 minutes. Okay. Again, I'm going to say it a lot during this class or this little series, class, whatever we want to call it. Really focus on your breathing. Okay. Making sure you're inhaling, which is going to expand everything. Exhaling is going to basically compress and shorten everything. Okay. Nice, big, deep, controlled breaths. And how you can see how I kind of started, rotated away from this hip. So I want to correct myself by bringing the center of my chest over the midline of my thigh. So just focusing on big, deep breaths. I'm going to remove the block. About 30, little less than 30 seconds. All right, 3, 2, 1, and then we're slowly going to exit the stretch. Okay. Good. So now we're going to go to the opposite, back to the opposite leg, and we're going to change the shin position just slightly on this variation. Okay. So for this last variation, we had the shin angle basically perpendicular to our torso. Okay, we're parallel essentially with our hips. And now what we're going to do is have a more vertical shin angle. Okay, so this one I'll show from the front first, and then the next leg or next hip I'll show from more from the side, because it's more important that you see the shin angle. The shin angle we want to try to remain vertical for this one. Okay, it's still stretching external rotators and glutes. It's just in more internal rotation than the previous stretch. Okay, so when we're setting up for this stretch, as you can see, my thigh is lined straight up and down here, which means so is my shin, hopefully. Okay, from here, what I want to do is bring this other leg behind it and across the body, but keeping the shin vertical. See how the femur angle is going to change, but the shin is still vertical. Okay, so keeping our chest aimed towards the ground, for some people, this might be enough stretch, okay? The progression, which you'll see me demonstrate over time, is, for one, the angle of the knee could start at like near 90 degrees. So we could start here and go across, okay? Just depending on how tight the outside of your hips are. Then essentially, over time, we want to slide this leg back and bring this hip down toward the floor. You can see that the shin is vertical, right? It runs, and I'll turn towards the camera here in a second. If my chest is facing this way, my shin is also facing that direction, okay? So I'll show you again from here. We're gonna go here, and you can see on the camera how I can get my hip down to the floor. I feel actually a really good stretch in the glutes. It feels amazing, but you can see in the camera here, my shin is running straight up and down, straight vertical. Okay, and that's the position we want to try to maintain. So again, we're going to go 2 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer now. You can think about pulling your leg into the back of your hip. Okay, and this should get a nice stretch on the glutes. This is actually one of my favorite stretches for my hips, especially with the squatting every day. The glutes can, start to feel, I don't want to say tight, but worked and trained. So this is one of my favorite stretches to do. It kind of just brings that internal rotation back, especially if you're somebody who squats with a more wider stance. This is a good stretch to spend some time on. Again, just focus on big, deep breaths. Breathing is really the name of the game. If you want to make progress in your flexibility, you have to learn how to breathe. And the same goes for strength, but since we're stretching, it's all about getting those inhales and using those exhales to go deeper in your range. To even make this harder, you can even twist or rotate almost towards the hip that you're stretching. So if I rotate a little bit towards, it's going to put a little bit more torque through that hip. It gives me just a slightly better stretch, okay? Got about 30 seconds. Good. All right, we're going to slowly come out of that stretch. All right, good. All right, so I'm not going to waste too much time. We're going to go ahead and switch to the other leg. Okay, so this you'll get the side angle on it. So again, starting here, okay, you can start from 90 and cross the leg. That might be enough. And then basically from this position, we just want to slowly work the hip into more flexion and then the shin vertical. So you can see how all I did essentially was slide straight back. Okay, we're going to go 2 minutes. Now this stretch, if you feel like you have one hip that has more external rotation than the other, this stretch is probably going to feel, more restricted on the side, on the hip that's more externally rotated, but it's also part of the reason why we're doing this stretch, okay? So whichever side you feel is tighter, that's probably the best side to start on. My side is definitely my left side. I have a left tendency to rotate to the left, so that left side is going to have more. It's generally a little bit more. Big deep breaths. The breathing through these stretches and stuff too is just going to help with the low back. So it's going to just really ease up the low back, help relax the low back. And really, you don't need tons of different stretches. You don't need a massive variety of stretches in one session. Just a good, solid, 5 to 10 or 12 stretches, kind of depending on how long you want the session to go or what you're trying to focus on, of good 2 to 3 minute or so holds. Granted, you're getting some good breathing in, some good inhales and exhales. It's really all you need, guys. Good, we're gonna come out of that, because if you're not effectively using the breathing to kind of take yourself through the stretches, then you're just spending a lot of time in positions that you're not really overcoming, right? You're yielding against those positions. You're not overcoming the position. You're not overcoming the tension and the resistance and the restriction. So, you'll find that you're able to start spending a lot less time stretching and a lot less different variations if you can just get that breathing in order, okay? So this turf is tearing up the socks. That's all right. So let's go ahead and get into our internal rotation stretch, okay? I know that a lot of people still have a lot of questions about this stretch. So let's try to make sure that we can get it figured out here, okay? So for the internal rotation stretch, we are essentially going to go back to that 90-90 position, okay? Now, the 90-90 position is actually generally it's a pretty tough, and since I'm gonna start with my left side. So I'm basically going back to where my right hip is up on the block. Okay. Or actually, yeah, my left hip up on the block. Now, from here, honestly, what I find is that with this hip kind of forced into more of an external rotation, it can be very restricting as to what's going on to this hip. Because this hip is already, basically, if you're looking at the piriformis, it attaches from femur to pelvis and then pelvis back to femur, right? So the legs are connected in that way. So if I straighten out this leg here, it frees up the range and the motion in my femur, which is going to allow me to get into this hip a little bit more, okay? And what I want you guys to think about is it's not just about rotating your torso, right? It's about sinking and almost pulling back into this hip. So the torso is going to rotate, but you almost want to think about actively flexing or pulling the femur into the back of the hip socket slightly. Okay, now a lot of people, if you rotate enough, that can help. And you may need to start higher. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the floor because I'm actually not really getting much at all. But again, the hip that I'm not stretching is just straightened out. It's gonna allow you a little bit more movement. It's not gonna lock up your hips as much. And then from here, I'm gonna stay upright, okay? So I'm not slouched, and I'm gonna rotate. And just that motion, you feel the hip socket or the femur kind of pull back into the hip socket. That's really what we're looking for, okay? The other thing you can do is you can bend this knee. So you don't have to necessarily have a 90-degree angle to start on this leg. You can bend that shin or bend the knee so the shin isn't as extreme. And I find that it actually takes a lot of torque off that knee. And then you can actually focus on sitting back into the hip a little bit more. So for those that get a lot of torque through the knee and they feel like they're not really getting anything from the hip, try bending this knee first. It's almost like a hurdler stretch, if you guys have seen that. And then you can sit back into this hip. Now, over time, you can get the knee out to 90 degrees because that's going to fix everything in place. So you're going to need that sort of at your end range. But initially, you might find that a little bit of knee flexion. Okay, so I'm not fully bent. Okay, I'm probably about halfway between full knee flexion and extension. So right in the middle of the mark. So I would say it's about a 45-degree angle at my knee. This actually gives me some good room to work with here. And so now I rotate and twist. And this is where we're going to get into the stretch, okay? So 2 minutes. You can also see if you want to, you can kind of get on top internally rotate that shin bone a little bit more, that might help take the torque out of the knee too. So instead of having the lower leg externally rotated like this, you can think about internally rotating slightly and then just again rotate into this hip. The other option for those that are really struggling with it is you can lean back, but you still have to think about rotating or pulling that pelvis or the femur back into the pelvis. Okay. This is closing the angle more and more the more you're sitting upright. Okay, so you still don't want to be slouched. You still want to be sitting upright. The torso angle just moves back a little bit and we're rotating. Make sure you focus on your breathing. You got about a minute left. Thirty seconds. Again, don't be afraid to sit up on a block, okay? Because then you can think about pushing that hip down almost towards the floor. So if you rotate and push, think about pushing that glute down towards the floor, that's gonna flex everything. Again, it gives you more room, okay? The point of stretching is to achieve a certain response and adaptation. It's not to hold a certain position that it's supposed to look a certain way. Okay, so if you ever question the position because you're not feeling the stretch, then that's probably not the right position to be in. So don't ever be afraid to kind of explore and move and rotate and see what you can adjust in the stretch to find what we're looking for. Okay, so let's go ahead and slowly exit that. Don't rush out of that. And we're going to move to the other leg. Okay, so again, kind of starting from my 90-90 position. My personal preference is the hip that's not getting stretched. I like to straighten that out. Okay, again, you guys can see I'm on a block. So just like the previous leg, if you feel a lot of torque on this knee, you can bend it. So bring the knee into some flexion. You can even rotate that shin slightly, and then you can sit back into that hip and see if you can get a good stretch. Okay. So again, play with the knee angle, play with the amount of elevation that you have. Okay. So go ahead and start the timer here, 2 minutes. So I'm actually just going to kind of bring it into where I was on the last leg, rotate. So this femur is like in an internally rotated position relative to the pelvis. Okay, that's kind of what we're going to stretch for, is just to really regain some of that internal rotation. About a minute left. Come off the block. So hip flexion, internal rotation. They go hand in hand. Anytime you're flexing the hip, it's an internal rotation torque. Okay? "30 seconds. Make sure you're getting your breaths. Especially if you're getting to, I'm not really feeling too much. I've done so much hip rotator work. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I don't really feel much stretch, nor do I really need to do these stretches. So I don't do them that often anymore either. But, you know, that's why you don't really see me like breathing through anything. It's because this is not a position that I struggle with. It's like I have my internal rotation that I want and need, right? So just make sure for you personally, you are getting your breathing. And any blocking sensation is this essentially the femur kind of getting jammed up in the hip socket. So try to make micro adjustments. Some of these stretches you're going to have to think for yourself. You're going to have to try to adjust and find a position again where you achieve the sensation. The sensation of stretching and tissue elongating and the joint capsule blocking are completely different sensations. You'll recognize it when you feel it or when you don't. Okay, so adjust accordingly. All right, so that pretty much covers what I wanted to do for hip internal and external rotation. Focus on the hips. Now, quite simply, I just want to end this stretch session with a couple solid hamstring stretches, and then a groin stretch, and finish with a quad stretch, and maybe even a little hip flexor. Okay, so we'll try to do about 4 to 5 more stretches. Okay, so let's go ahead. Now that the hip rotators have been stretched and a little loosened and they've been warmed up, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to stand. And what we're going to do in this position is basically elephant walks. Okay, so this is one of my favorite hamstring dynamic warm-ups and stretches, and to really teach people how to access the hamstring instead of those who just feel like behind the knees and low back. Okay, remember the name of the game for a lot of this stuff is getting hip flexion. Okay, which is also why it's good to put a lot of the internal rotation and external rotation work in prior to any of the stretching of these bigger muscle groups like the hamstrings and stuff like that. Okay, so basically what I want to do, and you can use a block. All right, don't be afraid to use different objects because it's a good support. Okay, and any sort of support we have is going to allow the body to relax and get the positions that we want. So basically what I want to do is just bring my ribs in contact with my thighs. Okay, again, a block you can use. All right, some might be able to just go straight to the floor, whatever works for you. Okay, I'm going to set the timer for 2 minutes. And basically you're going to alternate, straightening only one leg at a time. So I will straighten my right leg, and then my ribs and my thigh stay in contact still in my left. Then I go back to this position, and then I do my other leg. So don't just like do this weird like rotation or like Elvis Presley sort of thing here, right? Start in this bent knee, ribs in contact with thighs, and then from here, I'm straightening out one leg, get a stretch, hold it for a second or so, go back to my bent position, and then do the other leg. And then back to my bent position, and then repeat. So now I'm back on this leg. Okay? That's it. It's very simple. You just alternate, trying to fully extend if you can. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to pull your hips into a deep flexion. Almost think like a barbell good morning. Right? So if I'm doing a good morning, I'm going to hit this position right here. That's my starting position. And now from here, I am going into straightening out knees. And just slowly alternate. All right, so let's go ahead and start the timer. Let's do this one for 90 seconds. Just alternating legs. Let me make sure. I got to figure out my light. There we go. Timer started, so you guys keep on. So just alternating legs. Nice and easy. You can breathe in when you bend. Breathe out when you straighten. This alternating sequence also allows the pelvis to rotate, okay? So it's a little more forgiving. So you can see I go back to my bent position, then I straighten one side. Back to my bent position, straighten the other side. Back, straighten the other side, and so on and so forth, okay? All right. 3, 2, 1. Good. As you saw, in the middle of that stretch, I started with the block, and then I got rid of this block because I wasn't really getting too much of a stretch sensation anymore, and I needed to go deeper into the stretch, okay? So that's a good method, is just going to a position where you can mildly tolerate it, and then as you are able to tolerate it more and more, the sensation goes away, then we go deeper, okay? So we have to really make sure that we're focused and we pay attention when we're stretching. You can't just sit on a wall and sit on your phone. You know, you can be on your phone and on TV, but you also kind of have to focus and be a little bit more aware of what's going on while you're stretching and what you're feeling, right? So let's go ahead now. We're going to stand, and we're just going to do a standing pike, okay? So what this teaches, and the great thing about the standing pike too, guys, is, I'll kind of go more to the side so you know just a little butt, is obviously this is the position, right? Again, where you are on that spectrum, it doesn't matter. Some people start here, some people start here, and it's all hamstrings. Just keep in mind for this as well, you might have a lot of success if you're one of those individuals that only ever feels it in their back and behind their knees. You might be one of those who would be better starting with both knees bent and sort of getting the hips into some flexion and then straightening out from there. Okay, and now I feel it just deep in the belly of both of my hamstrings here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. I'm going to go 2 minutes on this one. It's okay to have the knees slightly bent, even if you still feel a hamstring stretch. A lot of people are going to be so tight behind the knees or so tight in their hamstrings that if they just lock out the knees, then they only feel behind the knees and they don't actually feel the belly of the hamstring sort of stretching. Okay? So over time, as the calf flexibility improves and even as your hamstring flexibility improves, it'll ease up behind the knees. But also keep in mind that some of the stuff you are going to feel behind the knees for a little bit. Okay, and you kind of have to work your way through it. Big deep breaths. So you can see as I exhale, I literally go deeper almost every single exhale. Got a little less than a minute left. And so for those of you too, where you really feel tightness and stretching in your back, that you also need to have low back flexibility for this, okay? So sometimes it's okay, again, if you feel it a little bit in your low back, that's fine. You can see here, I can get a nice lumbar curve going, right? I can get a lot of spinal flexion. So my back doesn't really bother me. I can really focus just on the hips alone, okay? But again, don't be afraid to use blocks. It's just, they're tools for you to use to better access ranges of motion, okay? Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, bend the knees to come out of that stretch. Okay? Pretty simple. If you can get into that pike stretch and you can feel it, it's one of the best bangs for your buck in terms of stretches. Okay? So next stretch, we're going to do a seated pike. So we just did standing. We're going to do seated. All right. So seated is really no different. Again, you can elevate the hips up slightly on the block so you can start more up here. Okay. And then you're just sliding your hands, reaching your chest long down your legs. Think about pulling your femurs into the back of your hips. So it's not just doing this, right? This is what you see a lot of people do, is they kind of just do this. They try to just round from the back and they feel like they're never getting anywhere. It has to come from the hip. You have to pull your femurs into the back of your hip socket, or even think about arching your low back and getting an active anterior pelvic tilt. Okay? So active anterior pelvic tilt. All right, I'm gonna start the timer here, 2 minutes. And it's actually, one sec, it looks like I messed up and did not turn off the freaking waiting room. Whoops. All right, well, looks like people were trying to get in with the waiting room. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so my timer's still going here. Okay, and so we're just holding seated tight position. Let me reposition myself better so you guys can see me. You can sit on a block. You don't have to. Okay. Message everyone. In about a little less than 10 seconds. All right. We'll slowly come out of that stretch. Okay. Good. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and go to some quad stretches. Okay, so it's a pretty basic lower body session, but these are kind of like the meat and potatoes of the lower body stretches, right? So hip rotators, quads, hip flexors, glutes, and we're going to hit some groin and hip flexor. Okay, so we'll go ahead. We're going to use your traditional couch stretch for the quad stretching. So if you have, like, again, a couch or a box or a bench or a chair, really anything that we can try to get like a more vertical shin. Okay, and then I'm going to go into this position here. I'm going to use my block as support. Okay, and I'm focusing on extending my hip. I'm going to go 90 seconds. And guys, you don't have to like super arch into this, by the way, because that's not really going to help anything. Just focus on extending the hip and bringing your glute to your heel. This turf is actually super unforgiving on bare skin. There we go. I was like afraid to put pressure on my knee because the turf was rough. At about 40 seconds. This is one of those stretches, if you really focus on those exhales, it's going to extend the hip and you're really going to feel a nice stretch. All right, good. Slowly exit that stretch. And we're going to switch sides. Motion sensor doesn't go off. I've got to fix the lights. Still getting some things together in the gym, guys. So sorry about that. I appreciate your patience with the lighting. I'm still having my little stretching corner. It's pretty much set up. There's just like one more thing I got to do. All the sessions from here on out will be filmed set up on the turf in my corner. I just haven't got my matting yet. So next week, if it's not here yet, then I'll just use my yoga mat until then. But all right, we're going to go ahead and get into the other quad now. And for those who just feel shin on this, like tibia stretching, the best thing to do is just do a little bit more shin stretching, like sitting in a seiza, or using like a bench or something to kind of alleviate that for the time being, okay? Nice. I can't seem to find my position. We got about 40 seconds left. Ten seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, and so that shin stretch I was talking about is simply just this one, right? Where we're sitting here. You can also add 2 by putting like a yoga block about halfway under your foot, because you want the ankle to be able to bend. So if you put too much of it under your foot, your ankles aren't going to be able to move down towards the floor. Okay, so this is a seiza. It's a really good stretch to kind of counteract a lot of the sitting and squatting and stuff, because it's just going to open up the front of those shins really well. Okay. So now let's go ahead and just go into a groin stretch. So we'll do the groin stretch. We'll do the a hip flexor stretch for each side, and then we'll end with a low back stretch. Okay. So Taylor's pose or butterfly. One of the most simple, basic, and effective stretches to hit sort of the short head of the adductor. Okay. And these classes are all going to have different focuses, which I'll label on the video. So, you know, they're not, I just kind of put them together based on certain things. But here's the butterfly. So again, for this, making sure we're sitting up, you know, nice and tall, head towards the ceiling, getting nice deep breaths. Okay, we're going to go 2 minutes here. You can lightly assist with hands. You can even lightly assist with dumbbells. The adductors are big, strong muscles. So this is one of those stretches that sometimes it takes a little resistance to kind of get into the ranges that you want to get into. You can see I'm slightly elevated up on the block right now. About 90 seconds left. A little less than 10 seconds. Okay, good. Slowly come out of that. Hopefully you guys have been focusing on your breathing, all right? So, actually I'm gonna throw one more in. Let's do a standing pancake to get a little inner hamstring, and then we'll finish with a low back stretch, okay? So, standing pancake is gonna be wide enough that you can still touch your ankles, okay? If you go too wide, you're not gonna be able to touch your ankles and it becomes more adductor and less inner hamstring, okay? So this is sort of the position that I'm looking for here. Okay, very simple, same thing, flexion of the hip. Okay, and you can even start too with a slight bend in the knee. If that gives you more of the inside hamstring, that's fine. And then over time, you can go into a straight leg. I'm gonna kind of fix myself against this block because my socks are sliding, and we're gonna go 2 minutes. Okay. I'm basically just sliding in the middle splits here. Not a very good middle splits either. So my pancake became a middle split, but you guys make sure you stay in pancake. You got a little less than 10 seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, come out of that. Now we're just going to finish with the last stretch, which is going to be a low back stretch. Okay, so basically it's called diamond pose. So we want to make the shape of a diamond with our legs. Okay, so basically our feet should still be able to touch, but they're out as far in front of us as we can get touching. Right, so if we start to slide them too far away, then the toes and the ball of the foot won't be able to touch. And then from here, what we want to do is I'm starting the timer for 2 minutes. You want to kind of curl the chin down into the sternum, and we want to round the back. Okay, so I'm keeping contact with my chin and my sternum. And I'm basically thinking about touching the top of my head to the inside of my feet here. So we should get a nice stretch through our entire back. We might, lower back, mid back, upper back, all is acceptable. 40 seconds. All right, and we're going to slowly exit that stretch. All right, so pretty simple, straightforward session, but that's really all you need. Okay, as long as you're really focusing on good breathing strategies and techniques while you're doing your stretches, and you find positions where you feel a stretch. Okay, no matter how it looks, I give you base positions, and you need to work from that position. Okay, especially the 90-90 stuff, it's a little different for everybody. Okay, pikes and things like that are pretty straightforward, pancakes, those kind of things. There's some slight adjustments you might need to make to bending the knee, straightening the knee, those kinds of things. But for the most part, like a lot of the rotation stuff can get a little funky, and I find that it becomes a little bit more subjective and a lot more individual, where obviously like a pike is the only difference is how far you can reach your hands down your legs, as an example. Okay. So hopefully, you know, that helped you guys. Again, pretty simple, straightforward session. Oh, you know what I did forget? Actually, let's go ahead and throw it in. I didn't do hip flexors. So let's go ahead and finish with hip flexors. Sorry about that. I'm gonna grab my big boy block. And so we're gonna do upright hip flexor. So you basically want to get into a lunge position. Okay, and you just want to think about sliding this back leg here. Just think about sliding it behind you and squeezing that glute and pushing that hip towards the floor. Okay, and we're just going to hold this stretch. We're going to do 90 seconds. This is a big one where you're going to notice massive changes if you can really focus on the breathing. Okay. And the more flexible you get, the more this knee has to bend. Okay, so you don't exactly want it at 90. You probably want the ankle slightly out in front of the heel, or ankle slightly out in front of the knee. All right, good. You're going to support your body. Slowly come out of that. Okay. Switch sides. Again, go ahead and start the timer. It's going to be 90 seconds. Thinking about sliding this leg back. A little less than 10 seconds, almost 5. All right, we're gonna slowly come out of that stretch. All right, now to end, we'll just do some child rockers. Okay, so basically you're going all fours. Just push your butt back toward your heels. Just do about 10 and 15 of these to kind of loosen up the hips. All right, guys. So that concludes this session. Okay, in the description, I'll put exactly what we covered. And then basically I plan on doing something like this once a week, various different topics. So the next one we'll do some upper body work. All right, so I'll see you guys on the next call. Otherwise, if you're watching this on a recording, hope you guys enjoyed the session. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, please send me a message, okay?